Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Hidden Human Story Radio with your host, Rita Jean Moran. Today is Friday, July 5th, 2013, and I am your host, Rita Jean Moran. Let me introduce myself. I've been researching ancient mythology and other subjects for a very long time. At the age of 10, I realized something wasn't quite right about the history that they were teaching in school. When I heard that the cultures of ancient Mesoamerica and ancient Egypt had not been in contact, I knew that there was something very wrong about that. I could tell that there were too many connections in culture for the two societies to have been separated. The similarities in pyramid construction, royalty, rites of the dead, and pantheons were too strong for it to just be a coincidence. As I got older, I worked a mainstream job, but my interest in ancient mythology and ancient people never went away. In fact, it's a passion that has lasted for over 30 years and continues today. One day back in 2005, I took my family to visit a cave in Texas. It was inside this cave that the idea came to me to write a children's series. That series has become known as The Library Kids. My 7-book series, The Library Kids, is a middle grade, ages 8 to 12 and up, book series about a group of children who find a secret magical library inside the cave of the Blue Mounds that has the entire history and knowledge of the earth in the past, present, and future. The children can go back in time and meet famous people from the past and travel to any part around the world. However, the children will end up with a mission at the end of the first book. Their mission is to battle the 7 enemies of the library and defeat the Dark Master that the enemies answer to. To do this, they must travel around the world to ancient sites and collect a set of 12 crystals that, when put together, will make a prison for that Dark Master. The children will travel to ancient sites in America, Mexico, Panama, Peru, Ireland, Greece, Mali, Egypt, India, Tibet, and Australia throughout the 7-book series. There will be some American history as well as ancient mythology, folklore, and legend in each book. The series is sure to captivate the middle grade audience as well as adults. Well, many of the places that are mentioned in my books are real places that can be visited as well. After developing and publishing this series, I've spent the last 3 years marketing the books to children and adults, but my research did not stop there. In fact, because of this series, I began to look deeper into ancient mythology and Greek, Roman, and Egyptian writings, and what I found will shock all of you. My material is absolutely original. No one has put together the ancient past like I have, and will prove to you from the writings that I have been looking into that are over 2,000 years old. I always knew from my study of mythology that all of the myths from every culture were extremely similar, and their gods and goddesses seemed to match up around the globe. In my Hidden Human Story series, I put together a theory called the mythological unification theory. This theory explains how all of the gods and goddesses from pantheons across the globe are really about the same people that lived probably about 16,000 years ago. In the 2nd book of my Hidden Human Story series, I delve into the ancient Greek, Roman, and Egyptian writings that tell a tale that hasn't been told nor understood for thousands of years. In the 3rd book, The Sacred Language of Symbolism, I begin to show you how the ancient sacred language of symbolism has been used to encode information that has been passed down for hundreds of generations and is coveted by the elite of today. With this radio show, Hidden Human Story Radio, I hope to bring this information and story of the past to life so that you, the public, can understand it fully and understand how this information was hidden from you. Without further ado, let's begin with looking into the past, and at the end of the show, I will have perhaps one of the biggest surprises of your life. The authors I'll be talking about probably are not familiar to you. Have you ever heard of the Egyptian scholar named Manetho? How about the Greek Nonus or Diodorus Siculus? Have you heard of Plutarch or the Roman Valerius Maximus? Probably not. But these are some of the most important ancient writers you can ever know about. Knowledge is power. There is a reason why religious fanatics burn down libraries and give the public distractions. In these ancient writings is the truth and your heritage that you have a right to know about. I present to you the past. All ancient pantheons are the same, and modern-day religions are based on ancient paganism. The gods and goddesses of old were real people that were different than us, but had some amazing experiences. They fought a terrible war between themselves and reduced the planet to cannibalism and savagery. After a horrible experience by one of the gods, a decision was made to civilize the world by traveling and teaching their mystery schools and knowledge of agriculture and medicine to everyone. The god that decided to do this went by many names. You may know him as Zeus, Enki, Odin, Dagda, Indra, Huitzilopochtli, and so on. He was the lawmaker and the god behind the old world order. His rules and knowledge came to him from the mother goddess, who taught him all that he knew and raised him. He and his children traveled the world and civilized it, and it is his bloodline that is the true royal bloodline and not what sits on the thrones of today. His tale is a sordid one, and he had many enemies, including his first wife. His whole family's past was one of violence, as his father overthrew the ruler of the time, and this god, Zeus, ended up overthrowing his own father and fighting the Titans to rule with the backing of the mother and grandmother goddesses. He was not very faithful to his wife, even though he had several children with her, and this made her very angry. He fought the ancient Titans and took over the kingship, and this made them mad as well. There seemed to be some distinguishment between his kind and what they called the humans. Yet this god mated with many goddesses and humans. He even mated with what was called his sisters, marrying one of them and simply impregnating another. He mated with his daughter named Persephone from his sister Demeter. He impregnated Persephone, and she bore him a son named Zagreus. The tale of Zagreus is virtually unknown, and it is a very gruesome one. Zagreus was slated to be the heir of Zeus. When Zeus left the child Zagreus to go out and travel, the child was savagely stabbed to death by the enemies of the god, and they ate the remains of this child and left only his heart. Zeus came back and found this heart and swore revenge. He swallowed the soul of Zagreus and tracked down the Titans who did this and tortured them to death. He then impregnated another maiden named Semele and transferred the soul of Zagreus into her son in her womb, and this child was born, and they named him Dionysus. He is also known as Osiris and has many other names as his father and all of the gods and goddesses around the world. It is the tragic story of Zagreus that inspired Zeus to vow to change the world and he and his family and their spouses helped him. Let's get started with more detail of these ancient people that I estimated lived about 16,000 to 17,000 years ago from my research. I'm going to read from one of my books that highlights some of the ancient writings that talk about the global travels of this family and bloodline that is still being hunted down today. The ancient texts that I am quoting from can be found through Loeb's or several online libraries. For those works that are not in the public domain, I am claiming Fair Usage Law, Title 17, Section 107, as this presentation is a commentary, and it is a presentation of the extensive research I've been doing. So let's begin. Okay. Diodorus Siculus was a Greek scholar who lived in Sicily from 80 BC to 20 BC. He devoted 30 years of his life to research the history of the world and write about it in his books entitled Library of History. He traveled to Egypt to learn from the scholars there. He wrote 40 books and 20 of them survive today. Pieces of the other 20 books can be found in the works of other scholars of the time. Here is what he wrote about the god and goddess Osiris and Isis, otherwise known as Dionysus and his wife. Now the men of Egypt, they say, when ages ago they came into existence, as they looked up at the firmament and were struck with both awe and wonder at the nature of the universe, conceived that two gods were both eternal and first, namely the sun and the moon, whom they called respectively Osiris and Isis. These appellations having in each case been based upon a certain meaning in them. For when the names are translated into Greek, Osiris means many-eyed, and properly so. For in shedding his rays in every direction, he surveys with many eyes, as if it were all land and sea. And the words of the poet are also in agreement with this conception when he says, the sun, who sees all things and hears all things. And of the ancient Greek writers of mythology, some give to Osiris the name Dionysus, or with a slight change in form, Sirius. One of them, Eumolpus, in his Bacchic hymn, speaks of our Dionysus shining like a star with fiery eye in every ray. When Orpheus says, and this is why men call him Shining One and Dionysus. Some say that Osiris is also represented with the cloak of a fawn skin about his shoulders, as imitating the sky spangled with the stars. As for Isis, when translated, the word means ancient, the name having been given to her because her birth was from everlasting and ancient, and they put horns on her head because of the appearance which she has to the eye when the moon is crescent-shaped, and because among the Egyptians a cow is held sacred to her. These two gods, they hold, regulate the entire universe, giving both nourishment and increase to all things by means of a system of 3 seasons, which complete the full cycle through an unobservable movement. These being spring and summer and winter, and these seasons, though in nature most opposed to one another, complete the cycle of the year to the fullest harmony. Moreover, practically all the physical matter which is essential to the generation of all things is furnished by these gods, the sun contributing the fiery element and the spirit, the moon the wet and the dry, and both together the air. It is through these elements that all things are engendered and nourished, and so it is out of the sun and moon that the whole physical body of the universe is made complete. And as for the 5 parts just named of these bodies, the spirit, the fire, the dry as well as the wet, and lastly the air, like just as in the case of man, we enumerate head and hands and feet and other parts. So, in the same way, the body of the universe is composed in its entirety of these parts. Each of these parts they regard as a god, and to each of them, the first men in Egypt to use articulate speech gave a distinct name appropriate in its nature. Now the spirit they called, as we translate their expression, Zeus, and since he was the source of the spirit of life in animals, they considered him to be, in a sense, the father of all things. And they say that the most renowned of the Greek poets also agrees with this when he speaks of the god as the father of men and of gods. The fire they called Hephaestus, as it is translated, holding him to a great god and one who contributes much both to the birth and full development of all things. The earth, again, they looked upon as a kind of vessel which holds all growing things, and so gave it the name Mother. And in like manner, the Greeks also call it Demeter, the word having been slightly changed in the course of time, for in olden times they called her Mater, or Gaia, Earth Mother, to which Orpheus bears witness when he speaks of Earth, the mother of all, Demeter, giver of wealth. And the wet, according to them, was called by the men of the old ocean, which, when translated, means fostering mother, though some of the Greeks have taken it to be Oceanus, in connection with whom the poet also speaks of, Oceanus, source of gods, and mother Tethys. For the Egyptians considered Oceanus to be their river Nile, on which also their gods were born, since they say Egypt is the only country in the whole inhabited world where there are many cities which were founded by the first gods, such as Zeus, Helios, Hermes, Apollo, Pan, Elei, Theai, and many more. The air, they say, they called Athena, as the name is translated, and they considered her to be a daughter of Zeus, and conceived of her as a virgin because of the fact that the air is by nature uncorrupted and occupies the highest part of the entire universe. For the later reason, also the myth arose that she was born from the head of Zeus. Another name given to her was Tritogenia, thrice born, because her nature changes 3 times in the course of the year, in the spring, summer, and winter. They add that she is also called Geocopia, blue-eyed, not because she has blue eyes as some Greeks have held, a silly explanation indeed, but because the air has a bluish cast. These 5 deities, they say, visit all the inhabited world, revealing themselves to men in the form of sacred animals, and at times even appealing in the guise of men or other shapes. Nor is this a fabulous thing, but possible, if these are the very truth, the gods who give life to all things. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. There's some more written that discusses some of the elder gods and the creations that they did, and we'll get to that at another time. But we're going to talk about Osiris next. This is from the same author, Diodorus Siculus. Osiris was the first, they record, to make mankind give up cannibalism. For after Isis did discover the fruit of both wheat and barley, which grew wild over the land along with the other plants, but was still unknown to man, and Osiris had also devised the cultivation of these fruits, all men were glad to change their food, both because of the pleasing nature of the newly discovered grains, and because it seemed to their advantage to refrain from their butchery of one another. As proof of the discovery of these fruits, they offer the following ancient custom which they still observe. Even yet at harvest time, the people make a dedication of the first heads of the grain to be cut, and standing beside the sheaf, beat themselves and call upon Isis, by this act rendering honor to the goddess for the fruits which she discovered, and the season when she first did this. Moreover, in some cities during the festival of Isis as well, stalks of wheat and barley are carried among the other objects in the procession, as a memorial of what the goddess so ingeniously discovered at the beginning. Isis also established laws, they say, in accordance with which the people regularly dispense justice to one another, and are left to refrain through fear of punishment from illegal violence and insolence. And it is for this reason also that the early Greeks gave Demeter the name Thesmosporus, acknowledging in this way that she had first established their laws. Osiris, they say, founded in the Egyptian Thebes a city with 100 gates, which the men of his day named after his mother, though later generations called it Diospolis, and some named it Thebes. There is no agreement, however, as to when the city was founded, not only among the historians, but even among the priests of Egypt themselves. For many writers say that Thebes was not founded by Osiris, but many years later by a certain king of whom we shall give a detailed account in connection with this period. Osiris, they add, also built a temple to his parents Zeus and Hera, which was famous both for its size and the costliness in general, and 2 golden chapels to Zeus, the larger one to him as god of heaven, the smaller one to him as former king and father of the Egyptians, in which role he is called by some Amon. He also made golden chapels for the rest of the gods mentioned above, allotting honors to each of them and appointing priests to have charge over these. Special esteem to the court of Osiris and Isis was also accorded to those who should invent any of the arts or devise any useful process. Consequently, since copper and gold mines had been discovered in Thebes, they fashioned implements with which they killed the wild beasts and worked the soil, and thus in eager rivalry brought the country under cultivation. And they made images of the gods and magnificent golden chapels for their worship. Osiris, they say, was also interested in agriculture and was reared in Nysa, a city of Arabia Felix near Egypt. Being a son of Zeus, and the name which he bears among the Greeks is derived both from his father and his birthplace, since he is called Dionysus. Mention is also made of Nysa by the poet in his hymns to the effect that it was in the vicinity of Egypt when he said, "There is a certain Nysa, a mountain high, with forest thick, and Phoenicia after, close to Egyptus streams." After the discovery of the vine, they say, as made by him near Nysa, and that having further devised the proper treatment of the fruit, he was the first to drink wine and taught mankind at large the culture of the vine and the use of the wine, as well as the way to harvest the grape and to store the wine. The one most highly honored by him was Hermes, who was endowed with unusual ingenuity for devising things capable of improving the social life of man. It was Hermes, for instance, according to them, that the common language of mankind was first further articulated, and that many objects which were still nameless received an appellation, that the alphabet was invented, and the ordinances regarding the honors and offerings due to the gods were duly established. He was the first to observe the orderly arrangement of the stars and the harmony of the musical sounds in their nature, to establish a wrestling school, and to give thought to rhythmical movement of the human body and its proper development. He also made a lyre and gave it 3 strings, limiting the seasons of the year, for he adopted 3 tones, a high, a low, and a medium. The high from the summer, the low from the winter, and the medium from the spring. The Greeks also were taught by him how to expound their thoughts, and it was for this reason that he is given the name Hermes. In a word, Osiris, taking him for a priestly scribe, communicated with him on every matter and used his counsel above all others. The olive tree also, they claim, was his discovery, not Athena's, as Greeks say. Of Osiris, they say, that being of beneficent turn of mind and eager for glory, he gathered together a great army with the intention of visiting all the inhabited earth and teaching the race of men how to cultivate the vine and sow wheat and barley. For he supposed that if he made men give up their savagery and adopt a gentle manner of life, he would receive immortal honors because of the magnitude of his benefactions. And this did in fact take place, since not only the men of his time who received this gift, but all succeeding generations as well, because of the delight which they take in the foods which were discovered, have honored those who introduced them as gods most illustrious. Now, after Osiris had established the affairs of Egypt and turned the supreme power over to Isis, his wife, they say that he placed Hermes at her side as a counselor, because his prudence raised him among the king's other friends. And as general of all the land under his sway, he left Heracles, who was both his kinsman and renowned for his valor and physical strength, while as governors he appointed Bursarius over those parts of Egypt which is towards Phoenicia and border upon the sea, and Antiochus over those adjoining Ethiopia and Libya. Then he himself left Egypt with his army to make his campaign, taking his company also his brother, whom the Greeks called Apollo. And it was Apollo, they say, who discovered the laurel, a garland of which all men place about the head of the god above all others. The discovery of ivy is also attributed to Osiris by the Egyptians' language, they say. The ivy is called the plant of Osiris, and for the purpose of dedication is preferred to the vine, since the latter sheds its leaves while the former ever remains green. The same rule, moreover, the ancients have followed in the case of other plants, also which are perennial green, ascribing, for instance, the myrtle to Aphrodite and the laurel to Apollo. Now, Osiris was accompanied on his campaign, as the Egyptian account goes, by his two sons, Anubis and Macedon, who were distinguished for their valor. Both of them carried the most notable accoutrements of war, taken from certain animals whose character was not unlike the boldness of the men. Anubis wearing a dog skin and Macedon the foreparts of a wolf, and it is for this reason that these animals are held in honor among the Egyptians. He also took Pan along with him on his campaign, who is held in special honor by the Egyptians. For the inhabitants of the land have not only set up statues of him at various temples, but they have also named a city after him in the Thebaid, called the native Chemo, sounds like Kemet, Chemo, which when translated means city of Pan. Now the story that Diodorus Siculus tells continues with Osiris visiting Ethiopia and India and other parts of the world. It was said that he was not warlike, and the people received him well. But in Thrace he slew Lycurgus, thinking of the barbarians who opposed his undertakings, and Marin, who was old enough, he left there to supervise the culture. Now it is further written by Diodorus Siculus that finally Osiris in this way visited all the inhabited world and advanced community life by the introduction of the fruits which are most easily cultivated. And if any country did not admit of the growing of the vine, he introduced the drink prepared from barley, which is little inferior to wine in aroma and in strength. On his return to Egypt, he brought with him the very greatest presents from every quarter, and by reason of the magnitude of his benefactions received the gifts of immortality, with the approval of all men and honor equal to that offered to the gods of heaven. After this he passed from the midst of men into the company of the gods, and received from Isis and Hermes sacrifices, and every other highest honor. They also instituted rites for him and introduced many things of mystic nature, magnifying in the way the power of the god. Although the priest of Osiris had from the earliest times received the account of his death as a matter not to be divulged, in the course of years it came about that through some of their number this hidden knowledge was published to the many. This is the story as they give it. When Osiris was ruling over Egypt as its lawful king, he was murdered by his brother Typhon, a violent and impious man. Typhon then divided the body of the slain man into 26 pieces and gave one portion to each of the band of murderers, since he wanted all of them to share in the pollution and felt that in this way he would have in them steadfast supporters and defendants of his rule. But Isis, the sister and wife of Osiris, avenged his murder with the aid of her son Horus, and after slaying Typhon and his accomplices became queen over Egypt. The struggle between them took place on the banks of the Nile near the village now known as Antioch, which, they say, lies on the Arabian side of the river and derives its name from that Antioch, a contemporary of Osiris, who was punished by Heracles. Now Isis recovered all of the pieces of the body except the privates, and wishing that the burial place of her husband should remain secret and yet be honored by all the inhabitants of Egypt, she fulfilled her purpose in somewhat the following manner. Over each piece of the body, as the account goes, she fashioned out of the spices and wax a human figure about the size of Osiris. Then summoning the priests group by group, she required all of them to take an oath that they would reveal to no one the trust which she was going to confide to them. And taking upon each group of them, part privately, she said that she was consigning to them alone the burial of the body. And after reminding them of the benefactions of Osiris, she exhorted them to bury his body in their own district and pay honors to him as a god, and to consecrate to him also someone that they might choose of the animals native to their district. Pay it while living the honors which they had from every rendered to Osiris, and upon its death accord it the same kind of funeral as they had given to him. And since Isis wished to introduce the priest to render these honors by the incentive of their own profit also, she gave them a third part of the country to defray the cost of the worship and service of the gods. And the priest, it is said, being mindful of the benefactions of Osiris and eager to please the queen who was petitioning them, and incited as well by their own profit, did everything just as Isis had suggested. It is for this reason that even to this day, even groups of priests, each group of priests supposes that Osiris lies buried in their district, pays honor to the animals which were originally consecrated to him, and when these die, renews in the funeral rites for them the mourning of Osiris. The consecration to Osiris, however, Apis and Minervus, and the worship of them as gods we introduce generally among all Egyptians, since these animals, and more than any others, rendered aid to those who discovered the fruit of the grain, in connection with both the sowing of the seed and with every agricultural labor from which mankind profits. Isis, they say, after the death of Osiris, took a vow never to marry another man, and passed the remainder of her life reigning over the land with complete respect for the law and surpassing all sovereigns in benefactions to her subjects. And like her husband, she also, when she passed from among men, received immortal honors and was buried near Memphis, where her shrine is pointed out to this day in the temple area of Hephaestus. According to some writers, however, the bodies of these two great gods rest not in Memphis, but on the borders between Egypt and Ethiopia, in the island on the Nile, which lies near the city which is called Philae, which is referred to because of the burial as the Holy Field. Consequently, the Greeks too, inasmuch as they received from Egypt the celebrations of the orgies and the festivals connected with Dionysus, honor this member in both the mysteries and the initiatory rites and sacrifices of this god, giving it the name Phallus. The number of years from Osiris and Isis, they say, to the reign of Alexander, who founded the city which bears his name in Egypt, is over 10,000, but according to other writers, a little less than 23,000. And those who say that the god was born of Semele and Zeus in Boeotia, Thebes, are, according to the priest, simply inventing the tale. Okay, I'm going to stop for a minute. This is important. This gives you a timing. It's telling you, that from the time that these people were living to the time of Alexander, which is about 2,000 years ago, it is in the age range of 10,000 to 23,000 years ago. Add 2,000 years onto that, we're talking about a range of 12,000 to 25,000 years ago. How I came up with the number 16,000 will be discussed possibly in the next show as we look into the writings of Manetho. Okay, so let's continue on and read a little bit more. Okay, now this is interesting, and as their legends say, the most ancient of the gods ruled more than 1,200 years, and the later ones not less than 300. But since this great number of years surpasses belief, some men would maintain that in early times, before the movement of the sun had as yet been recognized, it was customary to reckon the year by a lunar cycle. Okay, 1,200 years is quite a bit. And if we divide that by 12, we get about 100 years. So it's possible, but there's a lot of other mythologies out there that talk about the very ancients in the past having long lifespans and an advanced civilization, and we will discuss that in subsequent shows, but not today. So it's hard to tell how long, some of them ruled, but as you go back in time, their reigns definitely are listed as longer than the more recent gods. Now, Nonus is another interesting scholar as well. He was a Greek scholar who flourished in Egypt during the 5th century, and he wrote an epic poem called the Dionysica, which I'm sure most people never have heard of, because that's our wonderful educational system that works or does not. This epic poem describes the birth of Dionysus, his youth among the Corybantes and satyrs, and his upbringing by his grandmother Rhea. His invention of wine in honor of the death of a childhood friend named Amplius, his war campaign in India, and his spreading of his rights and wine cult, his loves and not-so-ethical love conquests, and much more. He dressed in purple. He wore snakes in his hair or a laurel wreath. He wore a woman's girdle and used a thyrsus as a weapon. He was considered to be an effeminate male god, and his army consisted of women and satyrs and trained lions and panthers who did the killing. Here are a few passages from the Dionysica. O mighty Dionysus, your father bids you destroy the race of Indians untaught of piety. Come lift the thyrsus of battle in our hands and earn heaven by your deeds. Oft he would show himself like a young girl in saffron robes and take on the feigned shape of a woman to mislead the mind of spiteful Hera. He molded his lips to speak in a girlish voice, tied a scented veil on his hair. He put on all woman's many-colored garments, fastened a maiden's vest about his chest and the firm circle of his bosom, and fitted a purple girdle over his hips like a band of maidenhood. But his guile was useless. Hera, who turns her all-seeing eye to every place, saw from on high the ever-changing shape of Laius, and knew all. That's another name for Dionysus, Laius. Then she was angry with the guardians of Bromius. He only tied his loose tresses with serpent knots, a grim garland for his head. Instead of fine-wrought greaves from ankle to thigh, he wore purple buskins on his silvery feet. Now the vine god left the Phrygian plain and entered Ascania. All the people gathered there, to whom Io, Bacchus, offered his fruitage, accepted his rites, and welcomed his dances, bowing the neck to invincible Dionysus, wishing for the quietude of peace without bloodshed. So mighty was the horned host of Bacchus, with the Bacchic women beside them, armed for war. But swift-shoe Hera, likening herself to an Indian, the curly-headed Melanius, warned Astrasteus, that spear-shaking captain of men, not to uplift the thyrsus nor to heed the yell of drunken satyrs, but to raise war to the death against Dionysus. In the morning the god went forth to war, driving before him the violence of the black men, who dwelt in Phrygia and Ascania, from the yoke of cruel tyranny. You that array a crowd of women against my armies, fight if you can with your womanish thyrsus. Play the champion if you can, and if you delight the heart of all mankind, all conquering. Now charm one only, whom nothing can charm, Orontes. Lord Bacchus was angry when he heard him, and with a vine cluster he tapped him gently on the chest. This tap of insignificant vine-grown bloom split his breastplate. The god's pike did not touch the protected flesh, did not scratch his body, but the coat of mail broke and fell with a heavy clang. Orontes was naked. Tribes of leopards and wild packs of lions and hunting dogs took turns in guarding Dionysus in the wilderness with sleepless eyes. All night they kept vigil in the mountain forest that no assault of black Indians might approach him. Long lines of torches flashed up to Olympus, the lights of dancing Bacchus, which he had no rest. Okay, there is some mention of Zagreus in the writings of Nonnus. However, I also found a very interesting passage, and I'll read it to you. Belos on the Euphrates called Ammon in Libya, thou art Apis by the Nile, Arabian Cronus, Assyrian Zeus, on thy fragrant altar that 1,000-year-old wise bird, the phoenix, lays sweet-smelling woods with his curved claw, bringing the end of one life and the beginning of another. For there he is born again, self-begotten, the image of equal time renewed. He sheds old age in the fire, and from the fire takes an exchange youthful bloom. Be thou called Serapis, the cloudless Zeus of Egypt. Be thou Cronus, or Phaethon of many names, or Mithras, the son of Babylon. In Hellas Delphinic Apollo. Be thou Gamos, whom love begat in shadowy dreams, fulfilling the deceptive desire of a mock union, when from a sleeping Zeus, after he had sprinkled the damp seed over the earth with the self-whetting point of the sword, the heights brought forth by reason of the heavenly drops. Be thou pain-quelling Pion, or patterned heaven, be thou called star-clad, since by night starry mantle illuminates the sky. Oh, hear my voice graciously with friendly ears. Such was the hymn of Dionysus. Then the vine god ascended into his father's heaven, and touched one table with the father who had brought him to birth, After the banquets of mortals, after the wine once poured out, he quaffed heavenly nectar from the nobler goblets on a throne beside Apollo and at the hearth beside Maia's son. Now, Plutarch also wrote about Osiris. I'm going to read just a little bit more. We're going to take a break and come back. Okay, Plutarch was also a Greek scholar who lived from 45 AD to 120 AD. He went to Rome and became a teacher. He wrote about many subjects, and some of his famous works included the Moralia of Moral Essays. In one of these essays entitled Isis and Osiris, he wrote, "One of the first acts related of Osiris in his reign was to deliver the Egyptians from their destitute and brutish manner of living. This he did by showing them the fruits of cultivation, by giving them laws, and by teaching them to honor the gods. Later he traveled over the whole earth, civilizing it without the slightest need of arms, but most of the people he won over to his ways by the charm of this persuasive discourse, combined with the song of all manner of music. Hence the Greeks came to identify him with Dionysus." Okay, we're going to take a little break and come back in a couple minutes. Okay, we're back. The fourth scholar that I'm going to talk about is Valerius Maximus. We've talked a little bit about Diodorus Siculus, Nonnos, and Plutarch, but Valerius Maximus was a Roman scholar. There isn't a lot known about him. They know he came from a poor and non-noble family. However, he was lucky enough to go to Asia in about 27 AD with a Roman general named Sextus Pompeius, who was in the circle of literary writers such as Ovid. And Valerius Maximus wrote something called Memorable Deeds and Sayings, 1,000 Tales from Ancient Rome. And his writings were very popular for a while. then they seem to kind of have disappeared. And this is where the surprise will come in of today's show, perhaps. It depends on how you see things. But I did some more research and found out that Plutarch believed that the Abrahamic god was Dionysus. Valerius Maximus believed it was Zeus. And here is what he wrote in Book 1 of his 1,000 Tales from Ancient Rome. The Jews had tried to corrupt Roman values with their cult of Jupiter Sabazius, so the praetor forced them to go back to their home. Cornelius Hispanus expelled the Chaldeans from the city and ordered them to leave Italy within 10 days to prevent them from making money out of their foreign science. The Jews had tried to pass their religion on to the Romans, so Hispanus expelled them from the city and demolished their private altars in all public places. The Senate decided that the temples of Isis and Serapis should be demolished, but none of the workers dared to touch the temples. The consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus took off his official striped toga, grabbed an axe, and smashed in the doors of the temple. So that should be your answer as to why these ancient scholars aren't talked about very much or taught about in the schools. So, Zeus, an ancient god, had to be hidden from his father because it was foretold that he would overtake him one day as Cronus had overtaken Uranus. He was hid in a cave on Mount Ida in Crete and raised amongst sheep and goats, and he was nursed by goat's milk. His grandmother, Gaia, raised him and taught him everything he knew. When his son Dionysus was born, Zeus's first wife Hera wanted him dead, as she was also part of the plot that killed the first Dionysus named Zagreus. So Dionysus was hidden, and Dionysus was raised and taught everything he knew by his grandmother Rhea. Dionysus also dressed as a woman, which would make him a transvestite. So, with that said, for those who have a curiosity about all of the symbolism and strangeness in Hollywood and the music industry and in architecture and in some of the secret societies, and some of the same symbols that keep coming up, this show tonight should ring a lot of bells for you and begin to give you some answers as to what went on in the past and how it's being hidden, and how everything that pretty much came from those mother goddesses passed on to the grandsons still comes through today in a lot of the mainstream religions. It was preserved in paganism, and a lot of the symbolism is still coming through in the mainstream, and definitely used in the secret societies. There was a bloodline, as I said, the tale of Zeus, the sordid one, and he mated with many goddesses and humans and had many children. Some of those children definitely came through the Osirian bloodline, which went into Ireland and Greece and other parts. Rome itself was said to have been formed by the children of Ares, Romulus and Remus. Ares was the son of Hera, so you could see a rivalry there, because Hera was angry of all of the illegitimate, because of all the illegitimate children that her husband had, and she didn't want them to succeed and take anything away from her legitimate children with her husband. So, The other thing that should have stood out today after today's readings was the global travels of Osiris and his brothers and sons, and I also believe his father. And I will eventually get in to a little bit more on it, but his father was the one who told him to do these travels and go into India specifically. So that basically gives a very good academic, not quite proof, but somewhat of a proof of how all of the pantheons came from the same source, and that is my mythological unification theory. And these gods, if you begin to look at all pantheons around the world, are the same. They just gave them different names and slight twists in the story, or they gave them a mythology that would work for where they were at in the world and the environment they had to deal with. But as you begin to look at like the stories of Odin and Balder and Jeb and Osiris and Zeus and Dionysus and the Dagda and Angus and Quetzalcoatl and Viracocha and Redhorn and all kind of, the Polynesian pantheons, you see the same story, and it revolves around the death of a son and a father god, and the establishment of a world order, and a lot of knowledge coming from the mother and grandmother goddesses who made sure that this great information of how to survive and thrive and have agriculture and medicine was passed on, and they backed up certain gods that would be the king along with the queenship. So that has gone on for thousands of years. In the last probably 1700 years, as pagans were hunted down and the true royal bloodline was hunted down and exterminated, this information has been hidden, and books have been burnt, temples have been destroyed, and bloodlines have been exterminated, and basically a whole lot of lies and coveting information has gone on for the benefit of a few. So next time I'll get a little bit more into the mythological unification theory and some other subjects. But until we meet again, take care. And if you like this show, come back and tell other people about it. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.